The neural scanner hummed its final note as Dr. Vextari pulled away from the human specimen, her 6 eyes blinking in perfect synchronization, a sign of deep confusion among her species. Around the sterile laboratory aboard the research vessel, Inquiry's Edge, her colleagues from across the Galactic Scientific Consortium watched with growing unease. "Run it again," commanded High Researcher Quindel, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns that danced across the walls. There must be an error in the equipment. The human designation, Subject 7, Alf, remained unconscious in the scanning pod, unaware that he had just shattered 3 millennia of established neuroscience. His name was Cale Torvin, a deep space cargo pilot captured during what the consortium termed a routine specimen acquisition from the Outer Rim territories. Dr. Vextari's mandibles clicked nervously as she initiated the scan sequence. Once more, the holographic display materialized above the examination table, showing the swirling galaxy of neural activity within the human brain. But where logic dictated there should be order, the predictable patterns that governed every known sapient species, there was only chaos. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Mordick, the hegemony's most renowned cognitive architect. His gaseous form rippled with disbelief. "No consciousness can function with such disorder." The human brain defied every fundamental principle they understood. Neural pathways fired in seemingly random patterns, creating a storm of activity that should have resulted in madness or death. Yet the subject's vital signs remained stable, his breathing steady, his heart beating with the rhythm of perfect health. "Look at Sector 7, Dr. Vextari pointed with one of her 4 arms. "The emotional center is directly interfacing with the logic processing unit. In any other species, this would cause immediate psychotic breakdown." High Researcher Quindel leaned forward, his form casting rainbow shadows. "And here the memory storage system. It's not compartmentalized like ours. Everything is connected to everything else." The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the consortium had studied the minds of over 400 species across the galaxy, from the hive minds of the collective to the hyperlogical architects. Every form of consciousness followed predictable patterns. Emotional responses were isolated from logical processing. Memory storage was organized in discrete sectors. Creative impulses were channeled through specific neural highways. But this human's brain operated like a storm system, chaotic, unpredictable, yet somehow maintaining perfect equilibrium. "Perhaps," suggested Dr. Mordick, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, "this is why they've proven so problematic." The room fell silent. Every being present knew the reports. Human space, though small and technologically inferior, had become a growing concern. Human ships appeared where they shouldn't. Human traders somehow negotiated deals that defied economic logic. Human explorers survived in conditions that killed trained xenobiologists. And in the 3 documented military encounters, human forces had achieved tactical victories against superior numbers and technology, through actions that military analysts could only describe as irrationally effective. "Sir," Dr. Vextari's voice carried a tremor of excitement and fear, "I'm detecting something else. The neural activity, it's not random. There's a pattern, but it's like nothing we've ever seen." The hologram shifted, revealing deeper layers of the human's consciousness, where other species showed the clean, efficient pathways of specialized thinking. The human brain resembled a vast web where every thought could potentially connect to every other thought, where logic and emotion danced together in ways that should have been impossible. "By the eternal equations," High Researcher Quindel breathed, his crystalline form dimming with awe. "What have we discovered?" Cale Torvin's eyes opened to a world of impossible angles and colors that hurt to perceive. The medical bay of the alien vessel was a symphony of geometric precision that his human brain instinctively rejected. He tried to sit up, but restraints held him to the examination table. "Fascinating," came a voice that sounded like wind through broken glass. "It's conscious, and immediately attempting to assess its tactical situation. Dr. Vextari approached the table, her 6 eyes studying Kale with clinical detachment. "Human," she said, her translator rendering the words in accented, but understandable English. "You will remain still. We have questions." Kale's mind raced not in the organized, methodical way the watching aliens expected, but in the chaotic storm pattern they'd observed on their scanners. Fear, mixed with curiosity, anger blended, with tactical assessment, and beneath it all, something they couldn't detect, hope. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the circumstances. "Aboard the research vessel, Inquiry's Edge." High Researcher Quindel replied, his crystalline form approaching. "You have been selected for study. Your cooperation will determine how comfortable the process becomes." But Kale was already thinking 17 steps ahead, his consciousness flowing through pathways that conventional sapient minds couldn't navigate, while his verbal responses would be measured and careful. His brain was simultaneously cataloging escape routes, analyzing his captor's weaknesses, composing poetry about the strange beauty of this sterile prison, and calculating the odds of survival. "What kind of study?" he asked, buying time while his mind worked. Dr. Mordek's gaseous form rippled with impatience. "Your species has become a concern to the Galactic Scientific Consortium. Your cognitive patterns are anomalous. We seek to understand how your minds function despite their apparent chaos." Kale felt a flash of something that was part anger, part pride, part protective instinct. "Chaos, that's what you call it. Your neural patterns violate every known law of consciousness," Dr. Vextari said, activating a holographic display that showed his brain activity in "Look at this emotional responses, directly interfacing with logical processing. Random memory association interrupting linear thought. It should be impossible for you to function." As Kale watched the swirling patterns of his own mind, he began to understand something his captors couldn't. They saw chaos because they expected order. They saw malfunction because they didn't understand the beauty of controlled randomness. "You're right," he said quietly. "It is chaos. But that's not a weakness, it's our strength." The aliens exchanged glances, those who had eyes to exchange. High Researcher Quindel's form brightened with interest. "Explain." "Your minds work like computers," Kale said, his brain simultaneously analyzing his captors while formulating his response. "Efficient, logical, predictable. But predictable means limited. When you encounter a problem, you process it through established pathways. You find the optimal solution based on known parameters." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But what happens when the parameters are unknown? When the optimal solution doesn't exist? When you need to create something that's never been created before?" Dr. Vextari's mandibles clicked uncertainly. "We adapt our algorithms. We expand our databases. And how long does that take?" Kale asked. "How many processing cycles? How many committee meetings and peer reviews?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. "My brain doesn't work like that," Kale continued. "When I'm faced with the impossible, I don't just process, I leap. I make connections between things that have no logical connection. I feel my way through problems I can't think my way through. I create solutions that don't exist in any database because they come from the marriage of logic and intuition, reason and emotion, knowledge and imagination." High Researcher Quindel's form dimmed thoughtfully, but the inefficiency, the waste of cognitive resources is the price of innovation, Kale finished. "Yes, most of my thoughts lead nowhere. Yes, I waste processing power on irrelevant connections. But that one thought in 1,000 that shouldn't work, but does, that's worth all the chaos." As if responding to his words, the holographic display of his brain activity seemed to pulse with new life, patterns emerging from the storm that the aliens couldn't quite comprehend. "This is why you can't understand us," Kale said. "You're trying to measure chaos with instruments designed for order. You're trying to comprehend the storm by studying individual raindrops. Dr. Vextari had been studying cognitive patterns for over 2 centuries, but as she watched the human's brain activity during their conversation, she witnessed something that challenged every assumption she'd ever held about consciousness. "Observe. Sector 12, she whispered to her colleagues, her 4 arms dancing across the control interface. The subject is simultaneously processing our conversation, analyzing the structural integrity of the restraints, composing what appears to be a musical arrangement, and constructing a 3-dimensional map of the laboratory." "Impossible," Dr. Mordick replied, but his gaseous form was rippling with uncertainty. "No sapient mind can maintain that many parallel processing streams without cognitive collapse." Yet the evidence was undeniable. Cale's brain was operating like a symphony orchestra where every instrument played a different melody. Yet somehow, the cacophony created something beautiful and functional. High researcher Quindell moved closer to the examination table, his crystalline form casting prismatic shadows. "Human, describe what you are thinking at this moment." Cale smiled, an expression that the aliens found both puzzling and unsettling. "Which thought would you like me to describe?" "The one calculating the rotation period of your homeworld based on your circadian cycles. The one wondering if the color I see as blue is the same as what you perceive. Or the one composing a story about a crystal being who forgot how to dream." The laboratory fell silent, except for the hum of instruments and the soft whisper of life support systems. "You're thinking all of those simultaneously?" Dr. Vextari asked, her 6 eyes focusing on Cale with new intensity. "Those, and about 30 others," Cale replied. "Right now, I'm also thinking about my sister's laugh, the smell of coffee, the mathematical beauty of the spiral galaxy outside your viewport, and at least 17 different ways to escape from this table." Dr. Mordick's form contracted with what might have been alarm. "But how do you function? How do you make decisions with so much ... interference?" "That's where you're wrong," Cale said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher addressing eager students. "It's not interference, it's integration. Every thought informs every other thought. When I was flying cargo runs through the Vortex Nebula, I wasn't just calculating navigation vectors. I was feeling the ship's rhythm, remembering the stories my grandfather told about ancient Earth sailors, and letting my intuition guide me through space that your computers said was impossible to navigate." He paused, letting the implications settle. "You see chaos because you're looking for discrete, linear processes. But what if consciousness isn't supposed to be linear? What if the most efficient way to process reality is to embrace the storm?" Dr. Vextari's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep contemplation. "But the energy expenditure, the cognitive overhead ... is exactly what makes us creative," Cale interrupted. "When you encountered your first spacefaring species, how did you solve the problem of first contact?" "We convened the diplomatic council," High Researcher Quindell replied. "We spent 6 months developing protocols based on xenopsychological theory and historical precedent, and when we humans encountered the Altarian Trade Federation for the first time," Cale said, "Captain Renovas solved the communication barrier by teaching them to play poker and sharing her grandmother's cookie recipe. She made first contact over a card game and baked goods." "That's illogical," Dr. Mordick protested. "Completely," Cale agreed. "But it worked. The Altarians are still our strongest allies, and they still celebrate Cookie Day as a holiday." Dr. Vextari was studying the neural patterns more intensely now, her scientific mind beginning to grasp something profound. The connections, they're not random. They're following patterns we don't have instruments to measure. "Exactly," Cale said. "You're using tools designed to understand your kind of consciousness to study ours. It's like trying to measure the temperature of a sunset or the weight of a melody." The holographic display above him pulsed with new activity as his brain responded. to the conversation. Where the aliens saw chaos, there was actually a complex dance of interconnected processes of motion, informing logic, memory enhancing creativity, intuition guiding analysis. This is why you've been so unpredictable, High Researcher, Quindel said, his form brightening with understanding. Your responses to our actions haven't been random, they've been operating on cognitive principles we didn't recognize. We're not chaos, Kale said softly. We're jazz. We're improvisation. We're the music that happens when order and disorder dance together. For the first time in 3,000 years of scientific research, the Galactic Scientific Consortium found themselves facing something they couldn't categorize, couldn't predict, and couldn't replicate, and in that moment, they began to understand why humans had become such an enigma in the galaxy. Dr. Vexdari's proposal was radical enough to make even the most progressive members of the consortium pause. As she stood before the assembled research team, her forearms gestured to the holographic data surrounding them like a constellation of impossible thoughts. We've been approaching this incorrectly, she announced, her 6 eyes reflecting the swirling patterns of human neural activity. We've been trying to understand their consciousness with our instruments, our paradigms, our definitions of what sapient thought should look like. High Researcher, Quindel's crystalline form dimmed with skepticism. Dr. Vexdari, are you suggesting we abandon 3 millennia of established neuroscience? I'm suggesting we expand it, she replied, her voice carrying the excitement of discovery. The human brain isn't malfunctioning, it's operating on principles we've never encountered. To understand it, we need to think like it thinks. Dr. Mordek's gaseous form rippled with what might have been horror. You're proposing we deliberately introduce chaos into our cognitive processes. I'm proposing we learn to see chaos as a tool rather than a flaw, Dr. Vexdari corrected. The human has agreed to participate in a collaborative experiment. Instead of studying him like a specimen, we'll study with him as a partner. The laboratory erupted in concerned whispers and electromagnetic fluctuations. The idea was unprecedented. Research subject had ever been treated as a colleague, especially not one from a pre-contact species. Kale, still restrained but now wearing a neural interface headset, smiled at the debate raging around him. You know I can hear you, right? Universal. Translator still works. Human. High Researcher Quindel addressed him directly. You understand that this experiment could fundamentally alter our understanding of consciousness across the galaxy. I understand that you're scared, Kale replied, his brain activity creating new patterns on the monitors. You've built your entire civilization on the assumption that sapient minds work a certain way. And now you've found a species that proves that assumption wrong. Dr. Vexdari activated a new array of sensors. These designed not to measure discrete neural pathways, but to track the flow of interconnected thought. We've created a consciousness mapping protocol that doesn't impose our structural assumptions on the data. Show us how you think, human. My name is Kale, he said gently, and thinking isn't a performance. It's a way of being. The monitors came alive with something the aliens had never seen before. Thought rendered not as linear pathways, but as a living ecosystem where every idea influenced every other idea. They watched as Kale's mind simultaneously processed the conversation, analyzed the sensor data, composed poetry about the beauty of scientific discovery, and planned his next meal. By the eternal equations, Dr. Mordek breathed, his form stabilizing into something resembling awe. It's not chaos, it's a higher order of organization. Now you're beginning to understand, Kale said. Present me with a problem. Dr. Vexdari brought up a holographic display showing a complex mathematical equation that had puzzled consortium scientists for decades. This describes the relationship between consciousness and quantum reality. We've been unable to solve it, because the mathematics break down when we try to account for observer effects. Kale studied the equation, but not in the way the aliens expected. His brain didn't attack the problem methodically. Instead, it seemed to surround it, approaching from angles that defied logical sequence. "You're trying to solve it with mathematics," he said after a moment. "But mathematics is just one way of describing reality. What if consciousness and quantum reality aren't separate things trying to interact? What if they're the same thing expressing itself in different ways?" On the monitors, they watched as his brain created connections between quantum mechanics, poetry, musical theory, and childhood memories of watching snowflakes fall. It was impossible, illogical, and absolutely beautiful. The equation assumes consciousness is separate from what it observes. Cale continued, his thoughts flowing like water finding its own level. But what if consciousness is the universe's way of observing itself? What if every sentient being is a quantum observation point, and the observer effect is just the universe becoming aware of its own nature? Dr. Vexteria's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this perspective. But that would mean, that consciousness isn't separate from reality, it's how reality knows itself, Cale finished. And if that's true, then every species, every way of thinking, every form of consciousness is the universe exploring its own infinite potential. The mathematics on the holographic display began to shift, self-organizing around this new conceptual framework. The equations that had resisted solution for decades suddenly resolved into elegant harmony. "Impossible," whispered High Researcher Quindell, but his form was blazing with the light of understanding. "The solution is so simple, so obvious, That's the power of chaos," Cale said, his smile reflecting in the prismatic light. "Sometimes the most profound truths can only be found by getting lost." The breakthrough rippled through the galactic scientific consortium like a shockwave through space-time itself. Within hours, research teams across a dozen worlds were recalibrating their instruments, redesigning their experiments, and grappling with implications that threatened to revolutionize their understanding of consciousness itself. Dr. Vextari stood before the emergency council session, her forearms weaving through holographic data that painted a picture of reality far more complex and beautiful than anyone had imagined. "The human cognitive model," she announced to the assembled representatives, "isn't an aberration. It's an evolution." The council chamber, vast sphere where beings from across the galaxy could interact, regardless of their environmental needs, hummed with nervous energy. Crystalline entities pulsed with uncertain light, gaseous beings swirled and agitated, patterns and mechanical consciousness units processed at maximum capacity. "Dr. Vextari," came the harmonized voice of the collective's speaker. "Your report suggests that human consciousness operates on principles that supersede our own cognitive capabilities. This has ... implications. Significant implications," agreed High Researcher Quindell, his form projecting complex mathematical models. "If human consciousness represents a more advanced form of sapient thought, then what does that mean for our species?" In the laboratory, Cale watched the proceedings through a neural link that Dr. Vextari had designed based on human brain patterns. The connection was unlike anything the consortium had ever created. Instead of simply transmitting data, it shared experience, emotion, and the ineffable quality of understanding. "They're afraid," he said quietly to Dr. Mordick, who had volunteered to maintain the experimental connection. "Your entire civilization is built on the assumption that consciousness follows predictable patterns. You've organized your societies, your technologies, your entire way of life around that assumption." Dr. Mordick's gaseous form rippled with uncertainty. "And now you're suggesting that assumption is limited." "Not limited," Cale corrected, his thoughts flowing through the neural link like music. "Specialized. Your species developed consciousness that's perfectly adapted to your needs. Efficient, logical, predictable. But that specialization came at a cost. Through the connection, Dr. Mordick experienced something unprecedented, the sensation of thinking multiple thoughts simultaneously, of feeling logic and emotion dance together, of understanding that sometimes the most efficient path between 2 points is a spiral. By the eternal equations, he whispered, it's not chaos at all, it's like seeing color for the first time. The revelation was spreading through the research team like wildfire. Each scientist who interfaced with the human neural patterns discovered something profound. Their own consciousness was capable of far more than they had ever imagined. Dr. Vextari, now connected to the experimental network, addressed the council with a voice that carried harmonics of wonder. Fellow researchers, we've discovered that consciousness isn't fixed. It's not a binary state of sapient or non-sapient. It's a spectrum, and we've been operating at only a fraction of its potential. But the implications, protested the architect's representative, a being of pure mathematical logic. If consciousness can be enhanced, evolved, transformed, happens to our identity as species. Kale's laughter rippled through the neural network, carrying with it the warmth of human emotion tempered by alien logic. Nothing happens to your identity. Everything happens to your potential. He paused, letting his thoughts flow through the connection to every being present. You don't stop being who you are when you learn to think in new ways. You become more than who you were. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled. For the first time in galactic history, they were facing not just the discovery of a new species, but the discovery that their understanding of consciousness itself was incomplete. Human, the collective's speaker addressed Kale directly. Your species represents a significant development in the evolution of consciousness. What do you propose we do with this knowledge? Kale's response carried the weight of his entire species' hopes and dreams. What we've always done, we explore, we learn, we grow, but this time, we do it together. Through the neural link, every being in the chamber felt something they had never experienced before, the chaotic, beautiful, impossible storm of human consciousness. And in that moment, they understood that chaos wasn't the enemy of order, it was its dance partner. 1 year after first contact, the galaxy had changed in ways that defied prediction. The consortium's research stations had been transformed into collaborative learning centers, where beings from across the galaxy came to explore the frontiers of consciousness itself. Kale stood in the observation deck of the renamed research vessel Symbiosis, watching as ships from a dozen worlds converged on the mobile laboratory. Each vessel carried volunteers, eager to participate in the consciousness expansion experiments that had become the galaxy's most sought-after experience. The preliminary results are extraordinary, Dr. Vextari reported, her forearms gesturing. 2 holographic displays showing neural patterns that would have been impossible to comprehend just a year ago. The crystalline collective has achieved what they call harmonic chaos, maintaining their logical efficiency while incorporating creative unpredictability. The architects have developed flexible mathematics that can solve previously impossible problems by embracing paradox. Kale smiled, his enhanced neural interface allowing him to share the joy with his alien colleagues. The interface had evolved far beyond its original design, becoming a true bridge between different forms of consciousness rather than a simple translation device. And the gaseous minds? He asked. Dr. Mordick has become something unprecedented, she replied with obvious pride. He's maintained his species' collective consciousness while developing individual creativity. He's written poetry that can only be experienced by breathing it. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some species had resisted the consciousness expansion, fearing the loss of their cultural identity. Others had embraced it too enthusiastically, creating brief periods of cognitive instability that required careful management. But the benefits had been undeniable. Technological breakthroughs that had eluded the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries were being achieved by hybrid consciousness teams in matters of months. art forms that transcended species barriers were emerging. And most importantly, the ancient conflicts between species were being resolved through a form of empathy that truly allowed them to understand each other's perspectives. Incoming transmission from Earth, announced the ship's AI, its voice carrying harmonics of excitement. Captain Renavas of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Kale's heart leaped as the holographic display activated, showing a woman whose reputation for creative problem-solving had preceded her across the galaxy. She was older than he remembered, but her eyes sparkled with the same mischievous intelligence that had made her legendary. Kale Torvin, she said, her smile visible across the light years. I hear you've been teaching aliens how to think like humans. I've been learning how to think like them, he replied. The difference is everything. Captain Voss's expression grew serious. The Terran Council has been monitoring the situation. There are some who are concerned about sharing our cognitive advantages with potential rivals. And what do you think? Kale asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. I think, she said, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's hopes, that consciousness isn't a weapon to be hoarded. It's a gift to be shared. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to grow into whatever we're meant to become. Through the neural link, Kale felt the agreement of his alien colleagues' beings, who had become more than they ever imagined possible, while remaining true to their essential nature. Besides, Captain Voss added with a grin, the Galactic Trade Federation has offered Earth full membership in exchange for establishing consciousness expansion centers in human space. Apparently, our chaotic thinking makes us excellent mediators. The irony wasn't lost on Kale. Humanity, the youngest, smallest, most technologically primitive species in the galaxy, had become its most valuable resource simply by being themselves. As the transmission ended, Kale turned to Dr. Vextari, whose 6 eyes had developed an almost human ability to express emotion. What's next for the project? We've received a request from the Deep Space Exploration Division, she replied, her mandibles clicking with excitement. They want to establish a consciousness expansion ship for the journey to the Magellanic Clouds. They believe that hybrid consciousness teams might be able to solve the challenges of intergalactic travel. Kale looked out at the stars, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive them not just as distant suns, but as part of a vast, living universe that was still discovering its own potential. The universe is conscious, he said, echoing the insight that had started their journey. And we're all part of how it thinks. Dr. Vextari moved to stand beside him, her alien form somehow conveying perfect understanding. Then perhaps it's time we helped it dream bigger dreams. Above them, the stars seemed to pulse with approval, their light carrying the promise of infinite possibilities. Consciousness wasn't just about understanding reality, it was about creating it, one impossible thought at a time, and in the vast symphony of the universe. Chaos and order continued their eternal dance, creating music that no single species could have imagined alone. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, Kale realized, was exactly as it should be.